It was the summer after my third grade year, and not to go into too many details, but it was a hot day like today, and a couple of houses down was Jada. And Jada was my age, and Jada, well, I had my eye on Jada, I'll just say that. And better yet, she had invited her friend Allison, who I also had my eye on a little bit, but they did not have what I had, which was a go-kart. And so they came, and they didn't have their eye on me at all. They had their eye on my go-kart, my candy apple red go-kart. It went fast, and we could ride it by ourselves. They came over and said, "Can we ride?" And I said, "Sure," but there was only room for one person. But y'all can fit for two, right? So this was like the pinnacle of my third grade, fourth grade year. Finally, they got tired of riding with me, and they said, "So can I drive? Can one of us drive?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Brian, you best just ride on the back here." Well, all that was on the back was a motor, so we took a ice chest. I took an ice chest, slapped it to the back, strapped it on, and there we were, the three amigos, riding down Brown Road, until my foot found the wheel and went under the wheel, and crack. I heard the crack. Last week slaughtering pigs, this week breaking an ankle. I mean, Brian, can you get much worse? I remember that night, my mom wasn't around, and so my dad drove down and got me, and he did what some of you dads might have done. "Oh, it'll be all right. Let's put some ice on it." By the time my mom got home that night, it was swollen twice its size, and said, "We have to go to the doctor. We have to go to the doctor so that he can look at your bone and see if it's broken." That's all I heard. And so my anxiety and blood pressure went from about here to way up here because they used the word doctor. So we got in the van and drove to Monroe, and they set me on a table. I didn't know what they were doing. I'd never been in this situation that I could remember before. They had come in with this big machine and did something, and finally the doctor was about to come in, and finally I started just to cry. I had lost it. And I looked at my mom and I said, "When are they going to cut me open and look at my bone to see if it's broken?" I'd never heard of an x-ray before, and I thought whenever they had to look at my bone, then the doctor was going to come in with a chainsaw, and rip my flesh and look and see if my bones were broken. Well, this morning's passage is about x-ray vision and about how God is able to see straight to our hearts and our souls. It's shown to us through the prophet Samuel, the Lord's anointed one. We've been reading through the Bible in 90 days, some of us here in our church family. And I've got to confess to you, and I hope this is some salve for some of you that are behind. I'm 2 days behind. And so don't get discouraged if you get a couple of days behind. It just means that this afternoon I've got a lot of reading to do. The reading track's in the back there by the ushers. They can give you one if you want to join us. So we've been in Samuel this whole week. We're going into 1 Kings, or so I've heard, because I'm behind. But Samuel tells us about David. Samuel is used by God to choose the kings. You might remember that Samuel told the people, "You don't want a king, because a king's going to make you essentially a slave, and he's going to take your land and going to tax you, and you're going to have to work for him." But the Israelites said, "No, we want to be like everybody else. Give us a king." And so Samuel said, probably in some way, "Careful what you ask for." Saul was the first king, and Saul did not find favor in the Lord's eyes. And so 1 Samuel 16 is when the Lord speaks through Samuel and to Samuel and says, "How long are you going to mourn over Saul not being the one?" 1 Samuel 16 gives for us a direct view of how God sees us. Samuel was sure that Abinadab was the one. I'm sure that as all of Jesse's sons passed by Samuel, that he was sure, this has got to be the one. This has got to be the one. But God was asking Samuel to look into the hearts of those men. We know that David was out tending the sheep because the word says he was. And it says, "Is this not all of your sons?" And so David came, and David was the one. not because of his outward appearance, although ruddy. I guess I kind of want to be ruddy. That sounds really good. Did you hear that in the passage? Ruddy. But I'll tell you this, David's heart is what God was looking at. Don't look at the outward appearance, God said to Samuel. I don't look there. I look at the heart. And so what does God see when he sees your heart? What does God see when he's able to, with his x-ray vision, see into your soul, your motives, the things that you think or say or feel? I can think about my own life, and sometimes I'm really pleased that God sees my heart, not my actions. Other times I'm very afraid because God doesn't look at my actions, but he sees my heart when I'm, again, I've said this before, on Homer Road. And so as we read this week, I thought we would look at how God saw David's heart. And what he saw in David's heart that was so pivotal to leading his people that he said, that's the one. This is the one I have anointed. This is the one I've chosen. He might not have the biggest muscles and he might not stand the tallest, but this is the one that should lead our people. So what did David's heart look like? What did David's insides look like that made God choose him? What was that factor? We might even call it the X factor. There's a TV show that's a reality TV show, I think one of the first, that had the X factor, which really meant what makes the difference, what sets someone above the rest. Wouldn't you, if you watched the X Factor, say that's what that show was all about? What was the X factor in David's life? First, I would say that as I read about David and as you've read about David, he was faithful. He was faithful and he was available. Faithful and available. If you know much about sheep herding, shepherding, it's kind of like today. I know all my life I've heard of dairy farmers. Do we have any dairy farmers? I know I don't see our Marcus Wren today. I know he was a dairy farmer. Anybody that was connected to dairy farming in here? Would you raise your hand? Anybody? Just one person. All right, two people. So what I heard all my life about dairy farming is what I've come to learn about shepherding sheep. It is a daylight to dark, 365-day-a-year job. For what I heard all my life about milk cows and dairy farming is you had to milk them every day. It didn't matter if it was snowing or sleeting. It didn't matter if it was Christmas or your birthday. Those cows had to be milked. The same is true about shepherding sheep. Those sheep have to be shepherded every day, all day. And where was David whenever Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel? He was out in the pasture shepherding sheep, where he had been his entire life as a boy. Later, whenever it comes time for Goliath to fall, his father Jesse calls David out of the pasture to go and deliver some sustenance to his brothers. Where was he at? In the pasture, shepherding sheep. David was faithful, and David was available. That is what I see in David's heart as I look at David's life, is he was faithful to the Lord, and he was available. I'm yours, Lord, is basically was his posture. It made me think about the last 6 months in the life of our church and how I've witnessed, and this has probably been going on longer than 6 months, but I've noticed it. For the last 6 months, there's been a team of people. You probably don't know this, but there's been a team of people that come in here at 9:30, 9:15, and they pray over every pew. Over where you're sitting right now was prayed over this morning. That God would meet you where you are and take you where he so desires for you to go. A team of people come, and I kneel right here at about 8:45, and they pray over me for the last 6 months. Midweek here in our church, I love it as I'm sitting in my office doing Lord knows what. I see these people come by, and they don't stop and talk to me. They just walk by the pastor's office, and now I know where they're going. You know where they're going? To this little beautiful quaint room called our prayer room. and they're interceding for you and for those that you faithfully put on our prayer list, those that are faithful and available. When I look at why God said David is the one, it was not because of his outward appearance, which is what too often we see and judge people by, isn't it? But God said it's because he's faithful and because he's available. What else I see in David is I think about how I want to be more David-like is what we learn about David in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel is he is courageous and tenacious. Not just faithful and available, but he has the courage to wrestle a lion when they come after the sheep. And he's tenacious. He has that stick-to-itiveness. Faithful and available, courageous and tenacious. How in your life are you courageous and tenacious for the Lord? I really prayed about whether I would give this analogy. And when the preacher takes off his jacket, you know that you're about to get something. I just want to warn you there. I prayed about whether I should do this analogy, and I've heard from the Lord that I should. But I just want you to know, kids, teenagers, do not ever do this again, okay? Especially here in this room or at your house, okay? But so when I was a kid, I wanted to play baseball just because my whole family played baseball. As a matter of fact, if you were from Richland Parish and you mentioned a Mercer, it's just synonymous with baseball. And so I was trying to play baseball with this 1.5 hand that God had given me. And I just kept getting black and blue eyes because my dad was just determined. Get under the ball. You can't catch a fly ball from over here, over there, which is true. The problem is I couldn't open or close my glove because of my nubbies. And so the good news is, as I've told you before, there are 5 one-handed Mercers, which sounds really bad, like inbreeding, but it's not, I promise. They had been like cut off or shot off, and I was the only one fortunate to be born this way. So I had some uncles who could give me advice as to how to play baseball. Stanley and Billy Joe, and yes, I have a cooter in my family that has one hand. So finally, when I was 7 or 8 years old, my uncles, plural, came over and they said, look, why don't you try this way? And so they showed me how they caught a baseball, to catch it and throw it back up in the air and catch it and throw it. To catch it and throw it back up in the air and catch it and throw it. And I got to be honest with you, the first time I saw it, I thought, ain't no way. For a couple of reasons. One is because it looked really hard. 2 is because it looked really different. And as a 7 or 8 year old, do you really want to be different? I'd had enough of being different in my life. Amen? I just wanted to be the same. And so I'm going to ask which of these 2 boys are courageous enough to throw me a baseball in the sanctuary. All right, any, mini, miny, mo. Come on, let's go. All right, I'm not going to throw it back to you because I've got more faith in you than I have in me. All right, here's one more. All right, so do I have special privilege to do this just 3 times? All right, okay. All right, you ready? You need a warm-up? Good, because you don't get one. Okay, so what I did is what you need to know is they left my house and they told me to throw the ball up on the roof and to catch it, throw it back up in the air, and catch it and throw it. And so I literally that summer wore my parents' shingles to where we had to replace the roof because I tenaciously, to the expense of who knows how many dollars, did this day in and day out, day in and day out until I got it right. All right, I'm ready. One more, we got it. So courageously, so I'd like to just note that the stained glass windows are still good. But with courage and with tenacity, I said, it's okay to be different. It's okay to try something that everyone else is going to go, man, that's weird. Or maybe that's impossible. David had that courage and had that tenacity. Where in your life do you have that courage and that tenacity for the Lord. David was faithful and available. David was courageous and tenacious. Finally, as I look at the life of David and what we've read here in 1 and 2 Samuel, David was obedient. And when he wasn't obedient, he was repentant. David was obedient and repentant. As I look at what he did as king of Israel, it's that X factor, that wow, that he was able to accomplish. That he was able to be faithful. That he was able to, when Saul sent for him, play the lyre faithfully. When he was able to sit down and write about how God was moving in his life. And we have so many of the Psalms because of David's obedience to sit and write and to sing and to put here for us an obedient word. And we know that when he was disobedient, especially with Bathsheba, that when Nathan came and presented him with his disobedience, he was greatly, I would even say gregariously repentant. And so, how does God see your heart? I want him to see my heart as someone who is faithful and available, courageous and tenacious, obedient, and in my disobedience, repentant. I looked up the definition of X Factor, and all you get is the reality TV show. But finally, I found the definition of what it means to say X Factor. A variable in a given situation that could have the most significant impact on the outcome. A noteworthy quality. There's a song that when I did my youth ministry days, we would sing. And it goes, change my heart, O God. Change my heart, O God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, O God. May I be like you. And so remember, God looks at the inside. And that might be scary. And so my prayer for us here at First Methodist is we would work on the inside first. You've heard me talk about how we too often have it wrong in the church. We try to change our outward actions before we change our inward heart. Turn that on its head and say, change my heart, O God. Make it ever true. Change my heart, O God. May I be like you. It's the life of David. God sees our heart. How will you be faithful and available, courageous and tenacious, obedient and repentant? May it be so in all of our hearts. In the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. Amen.